Now, before we start, Mike is having a little trouble getting on, so I'm going to start the process, and then Mike will take over from me as soon as he is able, which would be magnificent. Right. Jackie, you're going to tell us a story tonight. Jackie, you're going to do a story.
David and I are doing one together.
Can't hear me.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Jackie, you're muted.
Okay. I think there's just a delay.
Ah, right. So
yeah,
we can hear you now.
Good.
And who else is doing the story before we go? That's okay. Okay.
Chris Lowe.
And Francis, are you doing the story?
I will. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to start off with you, Francis. And so, Teresa, are you doing something?
Yeah, I'm going to do some poems, John.
Okay.
You know, your sound is really poor today.
Okay, that's Mike again. Hi, Mike. Okay.
Hi, Jane.
Right, I'll mention it.
John? Chris Lowe here. I think I was telling the story as well.
Oh, right. Has it gone badly, Julio? Is my sound badly?
Your sound's pretty awful.
Anyway, we better get going. Julio, you need to, Mike is waiting to be let in. Ah, hello, Chris.
Hello.
Down as Ben on the bottom. Okay, I'll start it off and then change for the speaking. Okay, I'm going to change machines. Well, ladies and gentlemen, hello, an assembled company. My sound is appalling. I'm going to change my and worldwide story round. And as Chris is with us, Chris Lowe is with us, and a request from Mike is that we start the whole show, the whole caboodle, with Chris Lowe. So, can you please, Chris?
He always does this.
Oh, that's not working.
You should know by now, Chris.
He puts me on first every time.
Well,
thank you very much, Mike. Right, you want me to start, John?
Yes, please, Chris, if you would.
Okay. Well, I'll get the pun in first, or I'll get this in first. I've been asked to tell a story from this book, Uncle Jack's Rainbow. Mike has asked me to tell it, so I'll do it. It's from my own pen. Okay, and it's a story I've been telling for years around festivals. Are you all ready? Are you sitting comfortably? Can't hear you. Are you sitting comfortably? Yeah, well.
Yes,
thank you. Well, I'm going to start. There were three remarkable things about Tom Reeves. The first one was that he was born on New Year's Day. Well, I'm not being quite accurate. He was born on the very moment that the clock struck 12. He came into the world. The second thing about Tom Reeves is that from the time he could string 2 or 3 words together, he knew the day he was going to die. I don't mean that he knew the year vaguely or just about how old he would be. I mean, he actually knew the day. In fact, he knew the hour and the minute he would die. I don't know if you can think about that for a minute, but that would be some burden to bear, but he bore it well. The third remarkable thing Well, perhaps I'll come to that in a minute. I should explain that Tom wasn't gifted. He didn't have good looks. In fact, he was the wrong side of ugly. And he wasn't exactly quick-witted. He wrote very slowly and he added up very slowly. But he did have one talent. The most remarkable thing about him, perhaps. When Tom Reeves walked, he walked entirely silently. He could walk across gravel and it wouldn't crunch. He could walk across dead leaves and they wouldn't crackle. And some in the village said that he could even walk across freshly laid snow and you would not see his footprints. So by the time he was 9 or 10, his name had been forgotten and the villagers were calling him Featherfoot. That was how he was known. Now, Featherfoot, or Tom, had a problem because now he was getting to the time when he had to leave school. In those days, 100, 150 years ago, you left school at about 13, 14. And he didn't know what to do. He couldn't add up and he couldn't write very quickly. So he couldn't be a clerk or at a farm recording all the bushels and that sort of thing. He wasn't very strong. So no one would employ him on a farm because he couldn't cart things around and pick up bales. With his looks, no one would want him in a big house. I mean, he wouldn't grace the house with those looks. So what could he do? He began to walk. That's the thing he did when he thought about a problem. And this time he walked into the woods, and he walked into the woods deeper than he'd ever walked before. And as he came round a corner, he saw her. There she was, standing on an old tree stump. She was about 6, 10 inches high, no more. And she had a diaphanous dress on and little things sprouting out the back of her back. Wings, by the look of it. Tom had found, well, what had he found? Can anybody tell me? Can I have a yell somewhere? Or a mouth? Can you mouth? He'd found a fairy. Oh, yeah, a proper one, though, this time, Gary. All right, let's have no sarcasm. He'd found a fairy. Now, most people say that they've never seen fairies, but of course they're liars. They don't realise they're liars, because when you're in the garden digging away with a trowel or a spade and you see something move out the corner of your eye and you look and it's not what you thought you first saw, but it's a flower. Well, that's what fairies do. When you look their way, they disguise themselves as flowers. Older fairies get the flowers right, and they don't have daffodils in September like some of the younger fairies turn into or appear to be. But that's what they do. And she was explaining this to him, and she explained she couldn't turn into what appeared to be a flower because she hadn't heard him. And then she explained that now he'd seen her, whether he made a noise or not coming towards her, she was enthralled to him, and she would have to be his fairy, so to speak. And she would have to be there if he came into the wood. Well, while she was doing this, she was shaking. And Featherfoot didn't bother to ask why, because he was so wrapped up in what she was saying. And the reason she was shaking was she feared Featherfoot. The reason she feared Featherfoot was that if you look at fairies, they begin to fade. And the more you look, the more they fade. And so in the end, they have a sort of fairy death. Well, she didn't explain this to him because he didn't give a chance. And Featherfoot walked out of the wood thinking about what he could do. And the idea suddenly came to him. The day after he left school, he led his first client into the wood. He walked more carefully than ever. And as they rounded a corner, there was a fairy. He called the client forward. The client saw the fairy, and the fairy was now enthralled to the client as well. And so Featherfoot did this time after time as the weeks wore on, until the weather got so bad, no clients were coming. But Featherfoot, as spring approached the next year, was walking again in the wood and thinking about all the money he would make for the family and how he would be able to support his mother and father and sisters, etc. And as he did so, he was totally lost in thought, and he stepped into a fairy ring. Now, you might know what happens when you step into a fairy ring, but just in case, I'll tell you, you fall asleep. And in some cases, that sleep can last for 100 years. In most cases, it does. But in Featherfoot's case, it didn't. It only lasted a few hours. And when he woke up, he seemed to be in a great hall. There were vaulting beams going up to a pointed sort of arch roof. And then he suddenly realized it wasn't a roof. It was the underneath of a great tree. He was in a great hall. And he looked down the hall, and there was the fairy king seated on a throne. And he hadn't got the face of a devil, and he hadn't got the face of an angel. It was something in between, something a bit like Mike Russ's face, I suppose. And the fairy king hailed him forward, and they went into an anteroom. And no one knows what was said in that anteroom. They were there for about an hour or more. But when he came out, Featherfoot didn't take any more clients into the wood. In fact, the following day, he moved into a small cottage in the middle of the wood. And there he wanted for nothing. He didn't live a life of luxury, but he had enough food and he had enough fuel. He was shown how to get it from the wood by the fairies. And as Featherfoot lived in the wood, he grew more and more knowledgeable about the wood, about the trees, the birds, the flowers, the streams, the grass, everything. And his reputation spread. And as his reputation spread, anyone who wanted to know anything about nature came to Featherfoot. There were princes, there were politicians, there were professors, anyone you care to name, any type of person came to meet Featherfoot. But we all grow old. And Featherfoot was no exception. And one day, many, many years later, Featherfoot walked out of the wood towards the church. He was now leaning on a stick. He still made no sound. The snow was thick on the ground as he approached the church. And when he got there, he stood outside because he'd never been in the church before. But then he went in. 15 minutes later, he came out and shook the hand of the priest as if some agreement had been made. And then he walked back into the wood. 4 days later, on New Year's Day, the vicar and 4 men walked into the wood, one of the men pushing a funeral bier with a coffin on top. As they got to Featherfoot's cottage, the men unloaded the coffin and shouldered it into the living room. Seated in the corner on a settle was the body of Featherfoot. He was dead. They picked him up and put him in the coffin, put the lid on, and then started to carry the coffin out towards the bier. When they got to the door, the priest held up his hand and pointed. Either side of the path in the snow, there were flowers. There were all sorts of flowers. There were primroses, there were daffodils, there were tulips, there were daisies, there were roses. Any flower you care to name was there. And as they walked onto the path in the wood, the flowers continued, and they continued into the lane, either side of the lane, all around the lich gate as they got to the lich gate where they rested the coffin for a few minutes because of the burden. And then they walked through the churchyard, either side of the path, there were flowers. And when they got to where the freshly dug grave was, the grave for Featherfoot, there were flowers all round the grave. And they buried Featherfoot that day. On the following day, the priest went back to see the flowers, but the flowers were gone. And that's the end of my story.
Okay. Right, I've swapped machines. Fantastic, Chris.
That's brilliant,
Thank you
Chris.
very much. Mike is still trying to get in. Apparently, Yuliu's locked him out. He's still out there in the snow. It keeps saying waiting for host to let him in. I'm sure there will be a solution. But right
John,
now, fantastic, Chris. Thank you for starting us off amongst the chaos.
That's all right.
Someone has to start in the chaos.
John, just to let you know, sometimes if you try to click into an old meeting, you get that message saying that you're in the waiting room. So it might be good to send him the link again.
Yeah, right. I'll just come on from Monday, actually a future meeting, which made life easier. Anyway, let's get back to the program. Let's leave Mike. I'll deal with him in a second. But for now, the order is we've had Chris, so fantastic. It's working. With Francis next, then Teresa, then Cooley, you want to do a poem? Yes, fantastic. Guest in with David. And then we'll put who else wants to? Maria, do you want to do Suzanne? Then we'll do Maria, then we'll do Suzanne, then we'll do Emma. I'll never remember that. Let's just go for the next three. So, and Karen, you'll all get on. And it'll be even better when Mike gets here because it will have some order to it. So
Really?
well, I'm forever optimistic. So for the moment, can we welcome Francis?
Thank you, folks.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, folks. It's great to be here, and thanks to Maria for putting me on to you. I'm discovering a new world because of her. As the salt said to the pepper, seasons greetings all. I'll tell you a story tonight. I've never told it to people before. It's a story I wrote with a new arrival of a baby to our family just a while back there. And it goes, it's Ireland of the magic mist. Long ago, fado, away back in the midst of time itself, before the Celtic race, the Milesian clan, the Viking invasions, the Tuatha Dé Danann reigned supreme. They were a race of people who had magical powers, yet they disappeared. Folklore tells us that they vanished and they live now under the fairy forts of Ireland and in the underworld. This is a time back in those days when all the birds of the air, all the fish of the water, and all the animals of the land could talk. A magic time. But all that magic went with the Tuatha Dé Danann when they disappeared. Some of the birds and the animals still try. What does a crow say? A crow says, caw, caw, caw will to in our native tongue. How are you? A sheep says, bovalum. Ba, ba, bovalum. I would like to. A cow, when a cow is licking its newly born calf, what does a cow say? Moo, moo, mavooning. My dear one, my loved one, in the Irish tongue. And what does a deer say? What does a deer say? Very few know what a deer says, because a deer is silent and cautious of people. It keeps its distance. It watches from the background. It has great stealth and speed and is very wise. Well, in the barony of Duhallow, near the village of Killincronan, there's a townland called Glowny-Coman, where I come from. Glowny-Coman, the glen of the Hurleys. And hurleys and ball goes back to the first game the people in Ireland played. A way back. You can imagine the Glen of the hurleys. 15 minutes that side, 15 minutes the other side. The ball is turned up, the hurley is swung, and the match into the fray it goes. And these matches are going on to present days. Even today's All-Ireland final was on. But you must remember, hurleys are made from ash trees. And at that time in Ireland, Ireland was covered in native woods of oak trees with oak and ash and birch. It was not like you see today. It was a lush green valley of native woods opening into green pastures, serenaded by our beautiful river Allow that flows into the Dallow and Kanturk and onwards to the Blackwater. At the back of the hill, above Rock Chapel, the River Feel rises, and it takes its magical waters to the kingdom of Kerry. Back in those days, these rivers teemed with trout and salmon and every sort. Sure, you've all heard of the salmon and knowledge. So who could doubt my story? Well, back in time, back those days, the cows and the hares and the otters and the birds who didn't travel too far would await the return of the salmon, bringing news from foreign waters. Then the swallows would arrive in spring, usually around the 12th of April in our part. And they would bring wondrous stories of foreign lands and its people, of endless sunny days, of oceans wide, of big sea creatures, from the wise old whales to the tiniest, sparkliest little starfish. Cast your mind back. Imagine back to the time of the two dead Annan. You're in Clowney Command. It's in spring. You're walking along. You can walking on a carpet of bluebells. You can smell the primroses on the bank of our beautiful River Allow. And then you hear the faintest snap of a twig. You turn just in time to see on Fiabawn the white deer disappearing into the vegetation. We walk this land today, but we are only fleeting custodians of it. There is a parallel world to ours, a world of intrigue and magic where the fairy folk hold sway. It is a world that the good people live and keep their magic, like the fairies that I heard coming out. And you live as good neighbours to them. And if you observe their rules, you good terms with them, but break them at your peril. It is in this world that the Fiabawn lives, but she keeps a constant eye on our world. It is said that only the fairest of hearts can see or touch on Fiabawn. But if she allows you this wondrous gift of touch and lets you, she nuzzles her head in your hand and allows you to look deep into the eyes of Fiabawn. You are looking back into the soul of humanity itself, into all the people and generations that are gone before you. Her eyes are like pools of mystery, and anybody that can look within will be granted the power of healing and many other gifts. They will be the light and key of destiny to restore magic back into our world. They will have the power to cure all ills and banish evil from our land, for it is only then that legend has it that all the birds of the air, the fish of the water, and the animals will be restored their speech. This story has been lost to our family for generations, but yet those generations have been good and kind neighbours to the good people, the fairy folk. Waiting on a child to be born, a child whose heart is as pure as the driven snow, a voice as beautiful it could charm the hinges of the gates of hell. Waiting on this child to be born. Has the time come at last? A child has been born into our family, its parents only having a fleeting knowledge of our old Gaelic tongue. Found compelled to call this baby Thea, meaning dear. Will this child fulfill the prophecy? Will she be the one to look deep into the eyes of Thea born? Thank you, folks.
Wonderful, wonderful, Francis.
Thank you.
It's a mighty evening. It is a wonderful evening. And
Maria was a great inspiration for that story as well. So she was marvelous.
I'll just let. Hello, Mike. That didn't work either. I think we've got loads of people on, so I think the problem might be your end. I'll carry on. I'm in the middle of announcements. I want to get the next person on, Mike. Let's see. Mike is still struggling. He claims it's Yuliu's fault. Yuliu says it's my fault. I think it's my fault personally, but that's there's no. No, actually, I think it's Gary's fault. Gary.
I know that a lot about the not go get on.
Well, let's just get on with it then. Let's just get on with it. And but Teresa, I believe I said you were next, didn't I? You need to unmute. Can you please put your hand? So, a round of applause for Francis, who's been, and Teresa, who is to come.
That was wonderful, Francis. I really enjoyed that so much. My family are from Cork, and you really reminded me a lot of my dad, actually, when you were telling that story. I just felt like really joyful all the way through, and it actually changed my mind about one of the poems that I was going to do. I've got 3 short ones. I wrote, for those of you that don't know, during the first lockdown, I did 60 days. Every morning I wrote a poem. So I'm just sort of airing them now. I'm printing off a few each week and just saying them to see what they sound like, and I'm in the process of editing them. But your story just reminded me of one that I printed off today. So I'll read that first, Francis, and this one's for you. It's called She Came with a Key. She came with a key, and there in the lee a great black horse, white stripe on his nose, long flowing mane with eyes that shone. His name was Ancient. Beside him stood a mare of grey, and beside her one of white. They waited all 3. It sat outside the ring of the blood-red roses. Tamed by the scribe, connected both to land and sea, yet touching neither. The spirit of each calling me to travel. And then a second 3, upon the wing, 2 before one with a will of its own. She told me that a union of the 2 creates a one, and that her name is known. It's known to those who are open to a new realm, an old realm, that place they call imagination. The end. So I've got just two more short ones like that for you. The next one is called Releasing the Oak, and it was an experience I had before lockdown where I came across an oak tree that was completely bound with fencing wire and chicken wire that went up about 8 foot of its trunk, and I had to get wire cutters and I had to get help with bolt cutters, and this poem is about that oak. And the choked oak spoke. In those old days, when marriages were held beneath my spread, I was seen for my hospitality, for my strength, a shade for the gods who reside herein. I was deeply revered. Now, here I stand, pierced and stunted, chained in a way previously unimaginable. And you are here, previously chained in an unimaginable grief, releasing me, sharing my wisdom, assisting the balancing that is necessary. You recognize my pain because of your own. This is a precious gift in the service of others. I am deeply thankful. You will always be blessed. As we cut through the tightest of bindings, the old oak took an in-breath as deep a sigh as the darkest lake. His out-breath was the gentlest caress of a balm so sweet, so sensuous, that our hearts dilated into an unforgettable moment. The end. And my last one is called Yesterday's Rain. A bright-hearted greenness colours my vision, while life's spinners hold me bone deep in kindness. High in the blue travels one who was rising way before dawn. It's time for reflection and shadow. It's our time to rest in our common mother root, in our common nobility, in our self-worth. Sharpen those arrows crafted from rowan of strength and of healing and purposeful pursuit. Bathe in the balm of a reflected light of healing and time to recoup and rest. Be delicate like sparrow, who scatters the seed and makes life so easy for those who come after, our young. Stand with bare feet where the dew of the morning meets yesterday's rain. The end.
Thank you, Teresa. Now, I'm just trying to remember what I said earlier. Mike, I've been trying to fight with Mike and of course, he's Ali, if Mike's in the waiting room, could you let him in, please? He's kind of yeah, so but he's listening to us. He's here in spirit, if not in voice. So I believe I said Keely was next. Am I right? So please, can we thank you, Teresa? That was magnificent. Another round of applause for Teresa, and a round of applause for Keely, who's coming to us now for the first time at the World Storytelling Cafe. Welcome. That's better.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me to.
So, Ali, thank you.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to start with my poem called Ragdoll. And this poem is dedicated.
Sorry, can you hold on, Cooley? Ali, there's a lot of not background noise behind you. If you can stay muted, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. Carry on, Cooley. Sorry to disturb you there.
Okay. I'm going to start with a poem called The Ragdoll, and it's to fellow ragdolls living with cerebral palsy. Silk, linen, velvet, cotton wool, made from all sorts, textured fabrics, buttons, ribbons, hips made from zips, up to daisy and falling to bits. Her heart is made of golden fluff. Her smile is stitched, shining bright. Now and again she's not there quite. Her spirit shines like ultraviolet light. Droops, dangles, her limbs and neck, durable to all types of wear and tear. Broken, damaged here and there, people stare, she just does not care. Battling, juggling impossibilities, shining diamond sequined eyes, always ready to give you a surprise. Like a cartoon, she always survives. Has trouble with her physical being. Words tangle in the laces of her head. Still figuring out what you've just said. Jerking, jolting to the day she's dead. Thank you. And the next poem is called Innocent Snow. It's got Punjabi word in it. It's the sari. Sari is a Indian dress. So this is Innocent Snow. She comes again in the harsh, treacherous, icy winter season. I watch her from inside my home. I observe her dropping fragments from the steel sky above, fluffy flakes like feathers from a celestial pillow fight, merging upon perfect powdered ground. She glitters in the sunlight like sparkling diamonds on every surface she settles. Silver sequins upon her silk sari, pure, flawless. She's as white as light. I am blinded by her beauty. Innocent Snow, seduced, lost in her gaze hypnotic eyes, she's killing me slowly with her icy kisses. She takes my breath away, covering me with blue bruises from frosty love bites. I touch her, she melts away. Enticed, I perish like the prey of a stunning snowy eagle. Always ready, attentive to attack. In the frozen air, with nowhere to hide. Her skates change course. She twists and turns. Dark stains on her sari. The black ice forms. Innocent Snow, she's no friend of mine. Now, the next one.
You've got one more for us would be fantastic.
Sorry?
One more would be amazing.
Okay, then one more is called Mistletoe. Mistletoe is a villanelle, and this is a love poem. Right? He kisses her beneath the mistletoe. How everything feels so vividly new. Cool winter warmth, pearls of promise glow. energy, affection in frosty snow. She's excited, amazed, dazed, it's untrue. He kisses her beneath the mistletoe, signifies wholesome life with ample flow. A desire to dream and embrace love through. Cool winter warmers, pearls of promise glow. A pure, sacred cure, the richness laid low. She's engraved on his soul like a tattoo. He kisses her beneath the mistletoe. Green garlands and translucent berries glow. Crowned queen of hearts in icy diamond dew. Cool winter warmers, pearls of promise glow. Adorned with joy, a double-edged bow. A magical time, love's moments are few. He kisses her beneath the mistletoe. Cool winter warmers, pearls of promise glow. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful, Cooley. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, I said my memory cells wouldn't hold out more than 3 people. I had this wonderful thought. That Mike joined us for a square for a second, but he seems to have disappeared into the ether. So I'm back. So Karen, I think, did I say Karen was next? I'm sure I said Karen was next. So anyway, if not, so we'll go Karen, Suzanne, then Jackie and David were going to do one, I think. So we'll do Jackie, Suzanne, Emma. So I get shot. There's people that I might see later in the week that are going to shoot me if I don't get this right. So oh, you want to go last? That's no problem. No problem whatsoever. I just wanted to make sure you got on. So we'll rejig that. This is beautifully planned, this whole show. So Karen, Suzanne, Emma, that gives us 3, and then I can think beyond that. Okay, so one more round of applause for Cooley, and a round of applause for as we welcome Karen in. Karen, over to you.
You're starting. Okay. Also joined by me, so Andy.
And we've got a bit traditional, haven't we?
Yeah. Okay. This is a story called A Collection of Journeys. A hard time we've had of it. Our lives were busy and full of promise. Out of the blue, coronavirus came, changing our lives forever. We could never have expected that. It brought with it fear and tears, breaking people, breaking lives, breaking hearts.
A hard time they had of it. Life was rosy and full of promise. They were to be married. Oh, excuse me. They were to be married. And every time she thought of it, Mary's heart leapt. But out of the blue, an angel appeared, telling her she was to bear a son, the Son of God. Well, she couldn't have expected that. And a moment of fear came upon her as her life was changed. How would she tell her fiancé, Joseph, her parents? Would it break their lives, break them, break their hearts?
As you can imagine, Joseph was shocked, confused, even humiliated. How on earth could she do something like that? Why would she? By law, old Jewish law, he could have had her stoned to death for adultery. But he didn't want to do that because he still loved her despite everything which had happened. His head instead spun as he tried to figure out what to do. He wondered if he could break off the engagement quietly. That night, he couldn't sleep particularly easily, and in a fitful sleep, an angel came to him. God spoke to him in a dream, saying that told him that he was carrying God's son. He was to name him Jesus, and that he was to marry Mary, and that all would be well.
Mary and Joseph knew the old prophecies that said the Virgin will be with child, and she will have a son, and he will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. Mary was so excited when she thought of these things. She was humbled and honoured, and she just could not believe that she'd been picked. But she treasured these things in her heart, and every now and again she would open that treasure chest in her heart and run her hands through the memories.
At around the same time, the emperor from Rome, Caesar Augustus, issued a decree which said that everyone should return to their hometown and be registered in a census of the whole Roman Empire. Joseph went to Bethlehem, and because Mary was betrothed to be married to him, she went on the journey too. And the journey they took was long and hard, and when they got to Bethlehem, there were too many people and no vacant rooms. Time and time and time again, as Joseph knocked on doors, they felt just the slightest glimmer of hope rising in their hearts, only to have it dashed to pieces when doors were shut in their faces. Another feeling that most of us have perhaps experienced so far in 2020.
We must go on, Joseph, said Mary. This baby is coming soon. And again, echoes of 2020, where we couldn't go inside and be with other people.
Joseph and Mary stood outside yet another door. Joseph knocked, and as the innkeeper answered the door and shook his head, he could see the look of frustration and dejection in Joseph's face. He could see Mary tired and exhausted, and he couldn't help but notice the huge lump in her stomach. And out of nowhere, compassion suddenly fell upon him. It's not much, he said, but round the back there is a stable you could use. It's shelter of a sort, I suppose, and it does at least have straw in it, which will keep you warm.
Mary's heart leapt. At last, she thought, I know this baby is coming soon. And the innkeeper led them to the stable, completely oblivious to what was going on in heaven at that time, as the angels leapt to their feet and shouted, come on, and called the innkeeper's name and cheered and clapped and stamped their feet and shouted, thank you. And then the innkeeper left, and Mary and Joseph settled down and made themselves as comfortable as they could.
Another difficult journey ended that night. Jesus had set aside his glory and his place in heaven, working alongside his Father, creating stuff. And he took this journey, a journey that lasted for an awful long time in many ways. Crawling inside to Mary, he scrunched up, waiting and growing for 9 months, and then suddenly releasing himself into the world. How silently the wondrous gift is given.
And God imparts to human hearts the blessings of his heaven. The blessings of his heaven. And as those two journeys ended, another journey started that day. A star was flung out of heaven in great joy and great excitement, and it skipped and danced and twirled and span across time and space to its appointed place, where it hung like a silver orb in the sky.
Another new journey started that night as the angels travelled from heaven down to earth, above a hillside where shepherds were tending their flocks. Well, if you're taking the notice of what some people might have said, you would have thought the angels had got it completely wrong. Shepherds, they were the outcasts of society, uneducated, unclean. No one wanted to know what they had to say. But the angels, well, they knew what they were doing, and they stood above the hillsides and they told the shepherds about Jesus, about the impending birth of Jesus. And the angels, they listened, and immediately once the angels had disappeared, they hurried off. They found him in a stable, in a manger, just as they were told. And that was yet another of the old promises being fulfilled. And after seeing Jesus in a manger and talking to Mary and Joseph, they rushed off into town, the shepherds did. They told everyone who would listen about all that they had heard, all that they had seen. They completed their long journey from outcasts to society, to not being welcomed by society perhaps, but being welcomed into the bosom to the family of Jesus and Mary and Joseph.
A whisper in the dark caused some stargazers to turn round and to look behind them and up at the sky at the silver star. And they became excited, and they consulted and discussed amongst themselves, and then they called for their seers and their advisors, and they consulted with them, and everyone agreed this was the King's star, a sign that a new king was born. But there was something really, really special about this star, and they knew it would be a special king. And in that part of the world, whenever a new king was born, the other kings would come and pay homage to that king. So they called their servants, who packed up their camels with food and drink and spices of myrrh and perfume of frankincense and treasure of gold. And they perhaps had one of the hardest, most dangerous journeys, but that is another story for another time. They arrived and they saw Mary and Joseph and the baby, and they gave him their gifts. And Mary looked down at the baby in her arm and she smiled, God's present to the world, wrapped in peace.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Now, that was wonderful. So a round of applause for Karen and
Andy.
Eddie. And now, and a round of applause for Suzanne, who's coming on next.
Woo!
Oh,
Hi, can you hear me?
yep, we got you.
Good, that's all right then. Be terrible if you couldn't. Storyteller without a voice. Anyway, I'm going to tell you one of my favourite stories that I can only really tell this time of year. Down in the forest, where the oak trees and the hazels grow, there was a little fir tree. There he stood, with his leaves growing in neat little rows along his branches, thin and pointed and a grey green. But the little fir tree wasn't happy, and very often he would let out a sigh. And on one of the occasions that he was sighing, a fairy flew through the forest. And she said, "What's the matter, little fir tree? Why are you sighing? Why aren't you happy?" "Well, you see, all the other trees in the autumn, all their leaves turn golden, and mine just stay the same colour all the time. I'd really love to have golden leaves." "That's not a problem," said the fairy, and she waved her magic wand, and one by one those little green and grey leaves turned golden. "Wow, look at me, I'm gorgeous." "Thank you so much." "Oh, you're welcome," said the fairy. But that very afternoon, a man walked into the forest, and he saw the tree. "My fortune, I have found my fortune. I can marry the farmer's daughter, and we will be happy forever." And he picked every single leaf off the fir tree and went back to his own story. But the little tree was naked. "I haven't got any leaves at all now." And he started crying. And the fairy came back the next day and said, "What happened? Where have all your golden leaves?" "Well, there was this man, and he came and he picked all my leaves, and I hope he's happily ever after, but I'm naked." "Oh dear, we can't have that. I tell you what, shall we find you some different leaves? What kind of leaves would you like?" "Well, I really like it when it's frosty and my leaves sparkle. but then the sun comes up and it melts and they don't sparkle anymore. Can I have leaves that sparkle all the time? Yes, no problem, said the fairy, and she waved her magic wand, and there each of his branches was a sparkling little crystal. Look at me! I'm sparkling! I'm positively glimmering! And look, as the winter sunshine is shining through the crystals and making rainbows on the forest floor. Wow! But that night, there was a terrible storm. The wind, it blew through the forest. The rain, it lashed down, and all those crystal leaves were smashed on the floor. The next day, the little tree was ever so sad. And the fairy came through the forest and said, "What happened?" "Oh, there was a storm last night, and all the crystals, they fell off, and there's no rainbows, just broken shards." "Shall we get you some different leaves?" said the fairy. "Yes, please. What sort of leaves would you like this time?" "I think I would like leaves like the hazel tree, because the hazel tree has big round leaves and they're so green and fresh looking and they're just gorgeous." "I can do that," said the fairy. So she waved her magic wand, and there was the fir tree covered in hazel leaves, bright and fresh and green. "Look at me! I'm photosynthesizing! Wow! Thank you so much." "You're welcome," said the fairy. But that very afternoon, who should come into the forest but a very hungry reindeer? He saw the tree, he saw those leaves, his tummy rumbled, and he munched his way along one branch, then along another, until all the leaves had gone. Well, the next day when the fairy came, the little fir tree couldn't even speak. "Oh my goodness, what happened?" "A reindeer came to the forest and ate all your juicy leaves." "I tell you what," said the fairy. "Would you like your old leaves back? No one eats them. They don't fall off. And they sparkle in the frost." "Yes, please," said the little fir tree. So the fairy waved her magic wand, and there, on his branches, in a nice little rose with those grey-green needles. And then the fairy says, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go into the villages and I'm going to tell them to come into the forest and dress you with strands of gold thread. I'm going to ask them to put sparkling ornaments on you." And this is why we have Christmas trees. And it's also why some people have a fairy on top of theirs. Thank you.
That was gorgeous.
Thank you.
I'm told you do a lot with dragons as well.
Yeah, I do dragons. Yeah, tonight
Mike's been talking about you behind your back.
Oh, I thought my ears were burning.
Yeah, he said nice things.
Oh, good. I made a change.
We don't say them back.
Yeah. So,
thank you, John.
That was wonderful, Suzanne. Now I'm looking round. There was a dog on there that Emma had been replaced by this wonderful hound. But now she's back to being herself. So and after Emma, we'll work out the remaining running order. But for now, please, could you another round of applause for Suzanne and welcome Emma. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So this is a story. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a small poem that I wrote about Lord Erpingham, who was from Norfolk, and he built a gate at Norwich Cathedral. William Shakespeare wrote about him in Henry V. He was quite a famous man. We've got a little village named after him. Anyway, but I would just like to tell you the story tonight of how Lord Erpingham built the gate at Norwich Cathedral. Here we go. Sir Tom and Lady Joan were off to mass. Every Sunday, her in her hat and finest dress, they'd take their pews and the Lord they'd bless. They were in love with each other. It was easy to see. The stolen glances at him, the pecks on her cheek. It was like they hadn't seen each other all bloody week. Now, Brother John would sit and watch from afar and dreamt of being the man in Joan's arms. But how could he be when the couple loved each other so obviously? A note, a letter, a WhatsApp, a DM? He just wanted to be her friend. He slid into her messages, but he hadn't thought it through. For Tom and Joan shared their social media, as some couples do. So who opened the DM? Not the intended. Tom saw the message from his old friend John, and right there, their friendship ended. But what could he do? What would he say? He decided Joan would meet Brother John anyway. So he got dressed in her dress and put on her makeup and popped on her shoes and appreciated his fake up. He called for his mate and he brought him his car and they drove into Norwich, which wasn't that far. So look, it is night. So by the time they got there, there was hardly any light, which was great for Sir Tom, who was dressed as Lady Joan and wanted to trick Brother John into taking her home. Brother John soon turned up, took a drag on his smoke. He was chuffed that Joan was there. He'd thought it was a joke. He put his hand through his hair and adjusted his trousers. He took a step forward and whispered, "Wowzers." He crept his stumpy fingers across Joan's waist, and Joan did not hesitate. She shoved him off and he fell to the ground where his head met a rock and he just lay there dumbfound. Tom stood still. He looked down at him, wishing with all his will that he would just get up. He shouted for his mate who was hiding around the corner. "I've got an idea," he shouted. "Well, somebody oughta." They heaved the Brother John into the boot of the car and drove him back to his priory by the light of a star. They sat him up against the wall, inside the priory gates, where it looked like he was just sleeping and not just met his fate. "Right, I'm off. We were never here." And they got back in the car and just disappeared. Now, Brother John, he was known to like the ladies. So when Brother Richard saw him sleeping, he thought he was being lazy. So he threw a stone at him to give him a shock, but it hit John in the head in the same place as Tom's rock. Brother Richard freaked out, as he would, and knew he'd be banished from the Brotherhood. So he heaved John's body over the wall and he gasped and he winced as he heard it fall. He paused for a minute and looked for his keys and did what any sane person would do. He flees. Some time had passed. It was now getting light, and Tom's mate drove back past and got a huge fright, for Brother John was on the wrong side of the wall. He stopped so quickly he made his car stall. Now, for reasons known only to him, for he was known to be a little dim, he heaved Brother John off the floor and shoved him through his driver's door. He positioned John in the driver's seat and placed a brick on the pedal instead of his feet. The car took off in a cloud of smoke and Tom's mate wandered off, muttering, "What a joke." Now, as for Brother Richard, he was driving along, wondering silently how he could right his wrong. He headed back to the ring road, mulling things over, when who should drive past him but Brother John in a rover. Now, Brother John, he was a man of God. So he saw this as a big nod to go back to the priory and confess quietly to the bishop and accept his lot. The bishop could not believe it. One of his own had killed another. "It's a sin to kill your brother," he cried. "Don't you see?" And he led Brother Richard to the hangman's tree. The crowds were milling, all waiting and willing to watch a man drop to his death. Tom and Joan stopped by. They'd brought tea and cake. But when Tom learned of why Richard was about to meet his fate, he realised his brother was to die for his sin. So he shouted and cried and made his way through the din. "Hangman, stop!" he cried. "Whatever you were told, it was a lie. I am the man who killed your brother, but it were for no reasons, like no other." So Sir Tom visited the bishop, and in front of him he kneeled, and the whole sorry story came out in one long spiel. The bishop took his time in thinking about what to do, and finally he said, "Okay, you now you must accept your fate, for Norwich Cathedral needs a new gate. As it was not murder, but manslaughter, it seems, and you have the money, build me the gate of my dreams." And that is how Sir Thomas Erpingham was almost cuckolded by his mate, killed a monk, and built a gate. Thank you.
Brilliant, Emma. Oh, now, and I crease up every time I hear that. Now, who haven't we had that? What, Maria, Gary, Janet, and then Jackie at the end. So, yeah, so it'll go in that order: Maria, Gary, Janet, Jackie. Can you all remember that in case I forget? Right. So we'll outro Emma with a big round of applause, and we'll intro Maria with an equally loud round. Maria, please take the floor.
I'm looking for my unmute. Am I unmuted now?
Doing all right.
Mighty. Thank you so much for fitting me in, Jan. Really appreciate it, you know. And what a night. Oh my God. Loved it so far. So there's been loads of fairies and woods tonight. So I thought I'd just carry on with that theme and tell you the stories about the fairies of Fitzgerald's Park. Once upon a time in Cork City, there was no money, but there was riches of other kinds. The children would be turned out and set free in the early morning, and they'd roam the hills and the streets of Cork, calling to one another and playing, and they had the best of childhoods. And they didn't need to spend an awful lot of money. In those times, there was very little in the way of parks. So there's a very famous park in Cork called Fitzgerald's Park. And if you ever come to Cork, you'll have to go and see it. But in these days, that didn't exist. There was no swings, there was no slides, there was no roundabouts or museums like there are today. No, instead of that, there was lots and lots of beautiful big trees. They were every size, big ones, small ones, fat ones, thin ones, red ones, green ones, yellow ones, every kind of tree. And the children would say to their mums, "What are we going to do, Mom? What will we play?" And the mothers would say, "Use your imagination, children. Look at the trees. What games can you think of to play, please?" And the children would say, "Chasing?" And the mothers would say, "That's a great game." "Climbing trees? That's an even better game." "Hide and seek?" And so it went. And they laughed so much and with such joy that the fairies in Fitzgerald Park, who lived in the roots of the trees, they started to have loads and loads of babies, because everybody knows that when children laugh, new fairy babies are born. They went, and everybody was so happy. So the fairies gathered all the children, all of the fairies together, and they said, "We'll have to give the children 3 wishes, 3 whole wishes." And then they decided that Clodagh fairy would be the fairy that would go out and deliver the good news. Clodagh had long red hair and freckles across her nose and a pink dress as pink as my scarf. And when Clodagh was happy, her skirt would grow. It would grow. And when she was really, really happy, her hair would grow too. So this day she was so happy that she was a big ball of happiness, and she flew out from beneath the beautiful roots of the trees to talk to the children of Cork. But do you know what size a fairy is? No, don't be silly. That's a leprechaun. A leprechaun is that size. A fairy is only the same size as a bumblebee. We know this because of the size of the fairy doors. So when she flew out and started to fly in between the children, do you think that they saw her? Yeah, not at all. They carried on playing, and she shouted, but she had a tiny fairy voice. Hello, children! Hello, children! But they couldn't hear her. And then she got a great idea. She'd land on Teresa's nose. That Teresa Kelleher, whose dad was from Cork. Right up on her nose she went. Oh my God, said Teresa. What's that? Is it a bee? And she was just about to squash Clodagh when the other children said, No, we think it's a fairy. So Teresa stopped with her hand and took another look and put her finger up, and Clodagh hopped onto her finger, and she said, What can we do for you? And Clodagh said, It's what I can do for you. I have 3 wishes. Well, the children sat down and they put their arms around one another and they discussed it, and they said, What would we like? And eventually one of the children stood up and said, Clodagh, the first thing we'd like is a swing, but not just any swing, a magical swing, a swing that will know if you want to go really fast, or if you want to take a really slow swing and just feel really comfortable. That's easy, said Clodagh Fairy, and she took out her teeny tiny magic wand and she touched the ground. Up from the ground grew 2 trees, just big enough for a magnificent swing. And then these living ropes started to grow out of the tree. What do you call living ropes, children? That's right, 2 vines, and they together. The first child that sat up on the swing, she was a really quiet, shy kind of child. And the swing went this way and that way and this way. And everybody began to feel really tired. But the next young boy who jumped up on the swing, he wanted to go really fast. Faster, swing! Faster, he called. And the swing went brrrr, and everybody laughed and clapped their hands and said, my turn next. But they were so good with taking their turns and almost forgot that they had 2 more wishes. And Clodagh Fairy said, Well? And one of the children said, I think we'd like a magical seesaw, one that would go even if there was nobody sitting on the other side. That's a great idea, said Clodagh. And there it was, right in front of their eyes. One young boy got up on top of it. His name was David. And he went up into the air and he came back down again, and there was nobody on the other side. And then David said, Go on, go faster, seesaw. And it went brrrr. And then his friend Thomas, he wanted to go on it as well. And then Seamus wanted to go. And then Susan wanted to go. And then everybody wanted to go. And they looked at Clodagh Fairy and she winked at them and she said, It's a magic seesaw. So they piled on, they all said, and they all jumped onto the seesaw. And do you know what happened? It started to grow. It got bigger and bigger until there was 40 children on either side of the seesaw, and it went way up into the air and then way down and way up into the air on the other side. And they could even see the goldy fish on the top of Shandon, a building in Cork City, and it's shining and glinting in the sun. Everybody had thought that that fish was only that size. But when they were on the magical seesaw, they could see that the fish was very long. It was long as two daddies lying on the floor, one standing on the shoulders of the other one. That's how long the goldy fish of Shandon is. It's 11 feet long. The children were delighted. Then finally, it came to their last wish. And the children looked at one another and they smiled at Fairy Clodagh and they said, Fairy Clodagh, we want a magical slide, not just any slide, a slide that's kind of invisible, but at the same time it glints and it has loads of colours in it. A slide that you can take a small slide on, or you can climb up into the sky and take a really exciting slide down. No problem, said Clodagh Fairy, and she touched the ground. The ground went. It made such noise that they could even hear it in County Kerry. And then, up out of the ground, started to build this beautiful slide that went round and round the fattest tree, all the way up to the top of the sky where the crows were circling, wondering what was going on. How do I describe the colour? Have you ever seen a dragonfly's wing? It's invisible, all right, but it has every colour of the world in it. Greens and blues and purples and yellows and oranges and reds, every colour. And that's what this slide was like. And some children, they climbed a small bit up and took a small slide down. But other children, they climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed right up to the top. And then they took a slide down. To the very end. That was brilliant, they said. Let's do it again. And that, children, was how Fitzgerald's Park in the city of Cork got all its magic. And it's still magic, even to this day. So when the COVID cloud is gone, when the silver lining of all our meeting and greeting commences, come to Cork, come to my city, and I'll show you the magical park.
Wonderful, Maria. Wonderful. Magic. Gary, are you going to continue with with magic? Could you fill us with keep filling us with magic?
Hopefully, that would be good, wouldn't it? But it might be a magic of a different kind.
Absolutely. So Maria, round of applause for Maria. Wonderful, and a round of applause to introduce Gary.
Thank you very much, Maria. That was a great story. And I was in Cork a few years ago, and Fitzgerald Park, I'd forgotten all about it, and I remember what a wonderful, beautiful place it was, and I didn't know that that's how it came about. And thank goodness for those children playing and their wishes. So anyway, and I've had one of these times when I've gone like, which story should I tell? Should I tell that one, and that one, and that one? And it's coming right down to this point right now, and this is the story that's coming out. So and it's set, and it's a story many of you will probably know. And I got this story, and I thank Taffy Thomas for this story, or at least this version of it. And it goes a bit like this. So it's set very, very far north of Russia, and And there are two great cities, one over here to the west and another one over here to the east. And about halfway thereabouts in between the two of them, there is an inn. And it's a very popular inn on the side of the road, and many travelers going between the two cities choose that inn to stay over. And Ivanovich, the innkeeper, had a very, very good trade. And his inn was filled with travelers. The fires would be lit at night, and the borscht soup and bread and would be served every night. And there were the balalaika players in the corner by the fire, and people were dancing. And then there would be storytelling, and it was a wonderful, wonderful atmosphere in this inn. But of course, this is set in the far north of Russia, and they have pretty strong winters there. And this particular winter, it was what they called the iron winter. It was so cold. Once the snow started to come in late September and early October, whatever, it snowed and it snowed and it snowed, and the snow just kept coming. And then when it did stop, it froze. And when it came again, the snow landed on top and it grew deeper, and then it froze. And so it was into the heart of the winter. And there came a time, as that time went by, the customers grew less and less and less and fewer. And there came a time when there was only Ivanovich sat in his great room with the fire roaring, and the borscht soup sat in a bowl, in a great pot, waiting for customers that never came. And all of his serving staff and everybody that worked in the inn had to let them go, couldn't pay them. No need for them anyway. Night after night, Ivanovich sitting in his great hall, his great room by his fire, waiting for somebody, something, all through the day, waiting, nobody coming. But still he kept the fire going. And still he kept a bowl of borscht soup, that beetroot, that deep, rich, delicious beetroot soup, cooking over the fire, and bread to go with it, just in case. Well, this was the coldest of nights in that long, hard winter. And the snow had fallen and fallen all through the day. And at night it had frozen. And Ivanovich was just ready to go to bed at the end of the day. There came a knock at the door. Quickly, he picked himself out of his seat and went across, and he opened the door and he looked outside, and there was a man standing outside of his door. Not a very particularly tall man, an old man. An old man with waving locks of white hair. And he was wearing a fur hat on his head, and he had a fur coat with a big, great collar on it. And his coat was green, and his hat was green, and it had a big fur rim around it, and it had a white fur ball on the end. And he wore these glasses, and he looked out from behind his glasses at Ivanovich, and he said, "Have you a room for the night?" And Ivanovich looked over his shoulder, and "Yes," he said, "I believe I do, and you are most welcome. Do come in. It will cost you 3 rubles for the night." And the old man said, "I'm very sorry to say, I have no money." "You have no money?" said Ivanovich. "Well, what are you doing at my door?" Well, he went to push the door closed, but the old man put his foot in the door before it had a chance to slam closed. And he said, "Ivanovich," he said, "just look outside now and see the night. If you do not let me in, you send me to my death." And Ivanovich, he opened the door and he looked outside. Well, the snow had fallen so deep that he'd have to duck to go under the moon. That's how deep the snow was. And Ivanovich saw how frosty and cold it was. And something in his heart gave. And he said, Come in and sit yourself down by the fire." And he shut the door, and the old man came in, and he sat down by the fire, and he started to warm his hands. And Ivanovich, he went to the pot, and he drew a pot full of, got a ladle after ladle of soup until the bowl was full, and he brought it to the old man, and he gave it to him. And he brought bread, which he broke off and gave to the old man, and the old man took the bread and he dipped it into the soup, and Good soup. And he ate and he wiped the bowl clean. Thank you, my friend, he said. And as he sat there, Ivanovich looked across and he saw that the old man, his white moustache and his beard had a big stain around it where the beetroot soup had been wiped. He couldn't help but get it there as he was eating the soup. And anyway, he just noticed that. And the old man said, my friend, he said, you have been so kind. I have to sleep. I'm very tired and weary from my traveling. And when you come to find me in the morning, well, don't even bother because I'll be gone. He said, but I promise you this, one day I will give you your 3 rubles and I guarantee it. And so Ivanovich showed the old man to his room and bade him good night and went off to close up the inn and make sure that the fire was safe and do everything he had to do before going to bed himself. When he woke up in the morning, true to his word, the old man had gone. Well, Ivanovich, he stacked up the fire and lit it and got it going again and prepared a new bowl of borscht soup. And as he was working, there came a knock on the door. Oh, and he went and he answered the door and there was somebody looking for a room for the night. Come in, he said, come in and make yourself at home. And he brought food and made the new customer comfortable. And before too long, there was another knock at the door and there was somebody else coming. When he looked outside and it seemed that, well, maybe there was some kind of a thaw out there because there were more people on the road suddenly and they started to come to his inn. And before the day was out, he had to call on some of the serving girls and the barman to come back and help him. And at the end of the evening, the fire was roaring, the whole room was packed, and the balalaikas were playing the balalaikas, the dancers were dancing, and at the end of the evening, there was storytelling, and the next day it was the same, and on it went, and couldn't believe his luck, how his fortunes had turned. Well, it must have been 2 or 3 weeks down the line when Ivanovich decided that it was time for him to go to the great city, the one off to the east. And he had to do some shopping, get provisions. He'd used up all of his stock of beetroot and all of the alcohol was running short as well. So off he went on his cart and his horse, and he went in through the great wooden gates of that city. And as he went through the city, there were the hawkers and the market stall holders and the jugglers and the musicians and the smell of fine food cooking, and there was all sorts which took his eye as he made his way through the market. But he had one thing that he wanted to do before all other things, and that was to go to the great cathedral and give thanks for the way that his fortune had turned. And he would deal with the market on his way out again. So he made his way through the city until he came to that great cathedral, and there it stood in all of its glory. And he tied up his horse and cart, and then he went in through the door and closed the door behind him. There were a few people in there praying and doing whatever people do in cathedrals. And I don't know because I'm not particularly religious, but anyway, he made his way to the place. I know this much, that you can buy a candle and you can take it and you can dedicate it to one of the saints and get the saint's blessing. So he went and he bought his candle and he looked around, and there were icons all around the cathedral walls of the various saints. And he looked around, and as he looked around, his eye fell on one particular painting. And he made his way across to that painting and looked up at it. It looked just like the old man that had been at his door a few weeks beforehand. An old man with locks of white hair and a hat with a fur around it, a green hat with fur and a bauble and a great green overcoat with fur at the collars and yeah, it looked just like that old man. And when he looked closely, he went, and his moustache and his beard had a little red stain as if he had been eating borscht soup. What else was he to do? What else was he to do but to put his candle here? And so there at the bottom of the painting, the icon, there was a little tray with sand in. You could put your candle in the tray, and if it should fall over by any reason at all, the sand would stop it from burning down the cathedral. So he just put his hand into the tray and brushed away the sand, searching for somewhere where he could put his, oh, what was this? What? Oh. And he looked, and there was 3 roubles, the cost of one night's stay at his inn. He looked up. He placed his candle there and he lit it. And as he lit it, it lit up the bottom of the painting. And when he looked, there, gold letters at the bottom of the painting were the words, Saint Nicholas, patron saint of travellers, of course. And so, my friends, you know who it was, Saint Nicholas, who had been to visit him that day. And Saint Nicholas, you know, his fame travels around the world. Around the time of Christmas, he would come, and in some places you would leave your shoes outside your door, and he would put little presents inside your shoes. And if you were good, then, you know, you would get presents. And if you were bad, then maybe you'd get coal or something else. I don't know, in different parts of the world. In the part of the world where I live, we come to that, of course, because eventually he traveled and he came to all around the world. And they call him Saint Nicholas, Saint Nicholas. I don't know how it changed, but somewhere along the lines, Santa Nicholas and Santa Claus, perhaps. He traveled across the Atlantic to America. And in America, they saw him, they call him Santa Claus, Father Christmas. And there was, as far as I know, this is the way I heard it, there was a particular company out there that sold soft drinks of the fizzy kind. And they saw this Santa Claus, and they thought he would make a good symbol for our company around Christmas time if only we changed his coat to look like one of our drinks. And so instead of having a green and white coat, he then became one who wore a red and white coat, and is the Santa Claus that we know to this day. And then where I live, he comes down your chimney and into your living room and puts a present underneath the Christmas tree that Suzanne had talked about earlier on in the session. And if you have been good, you will get your Christmas present. And if you have been bad, of course, you won't. And I can see he's sat in this space with us right now. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Gary. And I think the soft drink is an apocryphal story, because there are Victorian Christmas cards with a gentleman with some red on. But I quite like the mess. But brilliant, lovely story, Gary. Fantastic. Now we've got about well, we have to be clear. We have to be clear of the room in 25 minutes. But that just leaves us time to get in Janet and then Jackie and David. So marvelous. So without further ado, a big round of applause for Gary and a big welcome for Janet.
Oh, thank you, Gary. Do you know, I love that story. That's one of my very favourite Christmassy stories. We've had miracles and we've had magic. I don't know if there's any truth in the miracles and the magic, but this is a true story. And I know it's a true story because I was there. And I really am, no joke. Although I'm not the main character. The main character in this story is my sister. Her name is Sally. And we're very young at the beginning of this story, throughout the whole of this story. In fact, our ages haven't even reached double digits. Very young we are. Our Christmases were not like the Christmases of today. If you wanted to go into your parents' bedroom, maybe to take in your Christmas stocking, you didn't go bounding in and empty the stocking on the bed and show them all the little plastic bits and pieces that fell out. No, what you did was you knocked on the door and you waited until you were told you could go in. When you went in, and you had your stocking there, you put your hand right down into the toe because you knew it was Christmas and there would be the tangerine. And if you were really, really lucky, you might find a small slab of bluebird toffee. And I say you were really lucky because in 1952, sweet rationing was still in place. So it's very special to get a slab of toffee. And something else you didn't do in 1952 was sit on the sofa, eating snacks off a tray, watching the Christmas films on the TV. And the reason you didn't do that was because if you ate something, you sat at the table and you all sat around the table and you had a proper meal. You didn't eat off a tray. And anyway, you could not watch the Christmas films on the TV because we didn't have a TV. What we had was a radio. And so on this particular Christmas Eve, I think my sister and I were probably playing a simple board game like Snakes and Ladders. And we would be listening to 9 Lessons and Carols as it was broadcast from King's College, Cambridge. And upstairs in the bedroom, my brother John was being born. And he was called John because he was born around about the time of the 9th lesson, which comes from John's Gospel, chapter 1. Not saying my brother is the light of the world, but that's what John's Gospel says. So it was quite clear that Christmas 1952 was not going to be quite the same as the others before or since. And that's quite true, it wasn't, because Christmas Day found us sitting around my mother's bed. She's sitting in bed with her pink, what do you call those things? Bed jacket, pink fluffy bed jacket on. And there's a little bundle, a little baby propped up, wrapped up, propped up with a pillow beside her. My dad's on one side of the bed. So there he is, father, one side of the bed. My sister and I on the other side of the bed. And on our laps are trays. And we are about to eat our Christmas dinner from a tray. The Christmas dinner had been cooked by Mrs. Lowndes, who was a near neighbour. And it consisted of capon, so sort of chicken, stuffing, roast potatoes, gravy, and sprouts. 1950s style, very soft and very soggy. And we could smell from downstairs that spicy smell of the Christmas pudding that had been in the copper tub, boiled and had been simmering for the morning. And we wanted that. With thick yellow birds custard. That was going to be wonderful. So we sat, dinner on our lap, and we said grace. And my sister, after grace, looked around, and I think she was going to push things a little bit further in the not quite normal Christmas. And she did, because she said, I want to have my Christmas pudding first, before my dinner. Father folded his arms and said, no. Sally said, why not? Because I say so. And if Father said so, it was so. And so we had our Christmas dinner first. But left on the plate, my sister's plate, were 2 small, slimy Brussels sprouts. Father said, you eat your dinner, girl. And Sally said, no. And he said, finish up your sprouts. And she said, no, they're horrible. And he said, he does this, my dad. If you don't eat your sprouts, my girl, you will not get any Christmas pudding. Well, Christmas pudding was my sister's favoritist pudding of the whole year. And so the sprouts went down like it was wasp on holly. But they went down, and she and we were rewarded with a big dish of Christmas pudding covered in thick yellow custard. You know, when everybody's eating a meal and it's so delicious, it's silent, isn't it? Nobody says anything. The baby began to whimper with hunger. So my mother very quickly finished her Christmas pudding, picked up the baby, and she put my brother John to her breast, and he began to suck. And this was when my sister picked up her custardy spoon, leant across the candlewick counterpane, and said those words that every child has said at least once in their life, maybe 10 times, maybe 100. And she said, it's not fair. My mother said, what's not fair, Sally? And still waving her spoon, she said, how do you know he's not getting his Christmas pudding first? Well, Father looked incredibly uncomfortable, and there was nothing he could do because he certainly couldn't say, because I say so. My mother looked at Sally. With her free hand, she put her hand on the breast from which John was sucking, and she said, this side is dinner. This side is pudding. And Sally said, oh. She picked up her glass of cider, wasn't cider, Tizer, it was Tizer. Remember Tizer? Picked up her glass of Tizer, drank it. My father went, because he knew that afternoon, while Mother was having a nap and his 2 daughters were sitting by the fire reading those Rupert Bear annuals that they'd got for Christmas, he would be able to sit back and listen to Queen Elizabeth II giving her first ever recorded radio broadcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. That was lovely. And well, thank you all. It's all right. We're coming to you, Jackie and David. But thank you all for coming tonight. Normally we'd all meet afterwards, but I don't think we're going to have time because at 8 o'clock precisely we're going to slide away. But the next worldwide story round is on the 27th of 2 weeks' time, on the 27th. So, and Chris, if you come back, I will make sure Mike doesn't insist you go on first. But it's been a fantastic evening, and we're gonna finish with a special treat. We've got Jackie and David working together on a story. So a big round, an outro for Janet and an intro for Jackie and David. And thank you all ever so much for coming. You've been brilliant.
Dr. Esteban made another story. One day, the door was paper on the be good word be no mother a thing. that story made me that old story made me story I thought I wrote that story last week the day I investigated but it is both I said the story. That story over bar but I didn't take it up little bit. I did that but out the world to the demon. The body is at the book.
At this time of year, all people all over the world celebrate Christmas. They party and have fun together.
What the body by body? I wrote what I do today. It's the other but my it's I order at none the my other good is the but my but
One day, Fox sat by the fire and wondered, what will I do today? He thought this day was the same as all other days, normal day. Many ideas came to Fox's mind.
but that didn't complete a bad room.
But at last, he decided to visit his friend Wolf.
What do what I not at the door? What other the door at the cat up to? But I will to go at bed in.
Fox went to Wolf's house and knocked on the door. Wolf opened the door and said, "Can I help you?" Fox asked Wolf to come and play with him.
Oh, I got it. I can't baby the I have the me with my body table. Oh, okay, table. It went back on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't play with you today, Fox. I'm celebrating Christmas with my family, said Wolf. Oh, okay, said Fox, and he went back home.
But the down that body. It the over me. It would what it means.
Fox sat down next to the fire. He thought about Christmas. He wondered what it meant.
But the body. Oh, look at me.
Hey! Hey, Fox, said Fire. Who's talking to me? Asked Fox.
Man, but what do? What are the opa? I don't that. what all my bed did they do me the boss?
Me, Fire, I'm right next to you. What are you thinking about? I don't understand why all my friends celebrate Christmas, said Fox.
Whatever. They made it a special magic day. All the table for the get to add forget forget with everybody. I love the birthday when it goes down when my top up by the students. They are but the older they get it lot up but I like it at meditable.
Well, Fox, Christmas is a special and magical time of year. All over the world, people get together to have fun together and play together with their family. I love to see Father Christmas when he comes down my mouth to drop off all the presents for the children. Then I watch as they open their gifts and eat lots of food and laugh together. It's amazing.
Okay, good. But I don't understand the boss. Where my friend do not understand for the guy to do the do guy the better at matter is the boss.
But I don't have any family, said Fox. Well, my friend, you might not have family, but you can still enjoy yourself. Even if you're alone, you can still enjoy this special and magical time of the year, said Fire.
They were beautiful dogs. I never wow. But that but it over to me.
The room became dark and snow fell all around. Fox thanked Fire for telling him about Christmas.
So it be no wow to me. Meme that to be there is old war. I put to it to me. That
Fox thanked Fire for telling him about Christmas. So if you feel snow around you this Christmas, remember this story and share it all over the world. Put your tales in stories. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Jackie and David. What a wonderful way to finish. And we've got unmute yourselves. You've got about 2 minutes to shout your hellos, give your greetings, wish everybody a happy Christmas, etc., etc. Unmute yourself and shout.
Thank you, David. That was great.
Well done.
Well done, David.
Well done, David.
You make a good team. A very
Well
good
done,
team.
well done.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Really good.
Thank you.
And I've got a green Father Christmas.
Oh, the green Father. Lovely
Merry
tree.
Christmas, everybody.
And Merry Christmas. Wonderful evening.
Really great. Loved it. Thank you,
Fantastic.
John.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Hopefully see you in 2 weeks' time.
See you in 2 weeks'
Merry
time.
Christmas.
Grace, bye. Bye.
Have a
Okay.
wonderful one.
Magic.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jackie.
Well done,
Thank
David.
you, Cooley, and everyone that I
Bye.
haven't mentioned.
Bye.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mama.
Well
Thank
done.
you,
See you
mate.
soon.
Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you, my
Bye.
friend.
Great disguise, Chris. Not Chris. Mike, as the beard. You were well disguised as Mike.
Yeah, well, I'm a sort of substitute, Mike. So, so he's probably listening somewhere. He is listening. He's just. Anyway, good night, everyone. Thank you, Ali, for driving the bus again.
Welcome, John. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you.
See you.
See you all. Right. Thank
John,
you, Chris.
just before we go, because it's just very quickly, it came up on my screen that I could let somebody into the space as if I was co-hosting. Is that anything?
No, that shouldn't have happened.
Yeah. So has that got something to do with Mike? Why Mike couldn't get in? I have no idea why that happened, but suddenly it just went,
We've definitely had a glitchy evening.
the 13th, isn't it?
Is it? Oh, well, that accounts for everything.
Yeah.
Okay, see you. Gonna let Lucy in. Bye.
Bye-bye.